It's a year since the government promised to ban the sale of new build leasehold homes after thousands were sold with ground rents that double every 10 years. They end up impossible to sell on. But 2,600 such properties were sold last year, according to research by the TV property presenter Phil Spencer. And there are still no measures to deal with older houses and flats with existing leaseholds. There's a government service, it's called LEASE, which is supposed to help. But in 2017, the then chair, Roger Southam, told Winifred Robinson on this programme that such problems weren't their business.
Leasehold Advisory Service has never been there as a lobby organisation. The remit was free advice to leaseholders, which we've always given and we always give. Property managers don't get involved in the development process and don't get involved in the fixing of the ground rents.
So this wasn't one for you?
At that point in time, no, in terms of how we sit. Now, in terms of our change going forward, I hope that we can be active in lobbying, we can be active in marketing, and we can work in the best interest of the leaseholders.
Well, that's Roger Southam. He's the old former chair of LEASE. They've just appointed a new chair. She's Wanda Goldwag, who also chairs the Legal Ombudsman Service. Wanda Goldwag, what do you make of what Roger Southam said there back in 2017, that doubling ground rents wasn't an issue for LEASE?
Well, I've never met Roger, and I don't want to say ill of a man I've never spoken to. But I think there is a really quite fundamental issue here, which is that there has undoubtedly been problems with poor behaviour in some leases. And I think it's everybody's job to try and fix that.
So will you lobby on behalf of leaseholders?
So what I'm going to do is something a little different from that. I'm going to try and provide the data that everybody needs to find out what exactly is going wrong. So I'm creating a project which we call, not perhaps very imaginatively, Project Open Data. And we're going to take every single piece of information that we have collected in the last 5 years about what people are complaining about, what they're having issues with, what's gone wrong with their lease. And we're going to provide that data to the government, to civil servants, and to the very, very good campaigning groups that exist in this country. So what I want to do is to be part of the solution. I want to be able to make sure that we as a body go on doing what we've been doing very well, which is giving great advice to people who already have a problem.
So what are you going to do? Put that online in the public domain?
Yes, absolutely. So we are collecting it right now. I hope that it will be on our website by early April. For those people who are interested, I would like to ask people to give me advice about whether they want it heavily summarised or whether they'd like to actually be able to get to every individual record.
The problem is, Wanda, that some people have lost faith already in your service. Lisa Chappell bought her house from Taylor Wimpey 9 years ago for £162,000. In 40 years' time, the ground rent will be £8,000. And this is what she has to say about LEASE.
They didn't help us at all, and I feel like they did fail us at all levels throughout. They advised nothing at all and tried to pass the blame completely over to me as being the leaseholder, in saying that I was given the information at the point of sale and that it was my fault for not challenging it at the time, which wasn't the case. They didn't seem to have an understanding that this was affecting thousands of people, and if not even more than thousands of people now, hundreds of thousands. They said that it would have been a one-off case, and if I wanted to take it to citizens' advice, they would probably be able to help, which I did, and they knew nothing about it and said that this was too much of a bigger case for them to be handling. I've spoken to people on my estate and around the country when we've done demonstrations. I don't think we have any faith in them. It's not providing a service for anyone, but what appears to be more investors or freeholders rather than acting on behalf of a leaseholder.
It's a strong accusation, Wanda, that LEASE seemed to act more on behalf of investors or freeholders.
Yes, I believe that was the situation some years ago. I think the government asked the organisation at the time to find ways of getting money not just from the government but from running events, and those events were often attended by freeholders. That is not going to happen in the future. So I can give you absolute total assurance that from now on LEASE will only be acting on behalf of leaseholders. We are completely clear about that. We only have one set of customers, which are leaseholders. And I just want to say about what she said, I think that is a concern. I think it's really worrying that people are being told it's your fault, you should read the lease. You mentioned in your introduction that I'm also chair of the Legal Ombudsman, and I can tell you that 25% of the complaints that we handle are about conveyancing matters. Not all leasehold, but that is the biggest area of concern for consumers with their lawyers.
Right. I want you to hear one more thing. The co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on leasehold, Sir Peter Bottomley, says Lease does still have a number of problems to solve.
They were squeezed for money, but they tended to raise their money by giving advice to people who didn't need it so they could take money off those who couldn't afford it. But also I believe that Lease is one of the very few advisory services that in their annual report don't give a list in public of the things that they're noticing which should be put right. I think Lease ought to make sure that they use the accumulated wisdom of their advisors to tell government and parliament things which are wrong, which need changing. And I think they ought to be able to say in public who needs naming and shaming in the leasehold field. Additionally, they might mention to government there is no reason for having a ground rent at all. It buys you nothing, and they ought to be saying the sooner they go the better, both in houses and in flats. I believe that Lease can't seriously go on for a long time without having one or two leaseholders on the board or people who've had experience of advising them. And the idea that you can have a service like Lease without anybody who's been through the mill of being a residential leaseholder strikes me as odd.
So that was Peter Bottomley. Wanda Goldwag, do you plan to have somebody directly affected by leasehold problems on the board?
No, I don't. And the reason I don't is that's not how government bodies work. What we do is we have non-execs who are there to make sure that the service is excellent. So I want to say that I think what Sir Peter Bottomley and his colleagues have done has actually been excellent. I've spent some time with him recently, and I also went and met with a campaigning group called NLC, the National Leaseholder Campaign. I think what they have done is really first class. They have brought this to everyone's attention. Now, what my job is to do is to ensure that while they campaign, I provide exactly as Sir Peter suggested, the information and data on what are the trends, what are the issues that people are facing. Now, he mentioned ground rent, and that is certainly a problem. But I would say from my really extensive 3 weeks at least, that there is also a huge issue around people being charged service fees for very little.
I mean, some people may feel Lease is so tarnished that your funding will be better shared out. You know, there are charities like the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, Citizens Advice, who might be able to help homeowners more.
So it's not for me to say where the government should spend its money. What I'm going to try and make sure is that the money that Lease does get, we use very, very effectively. So I'm going to ensure that we provide the best possible legal advice for people. And people say, well, you only get a short appointment with your Lease. That's not the case. You get an initial appointment, and many people ring us 7, 8, 9, 10 times. We read people's leases and we very much try and help them. I think there is an issue because sometimes the advice we give is not very popular, because the advice we're giving is actually your lease is pretty dreadful and you are in a very difficult situation. But what I'm going to do is to make sure that every penny that Lease gets is spent well helping leaseholders.
Now, when the Lease service was first set up, it wasn't wholly government funded, and some money came from seminars for property companies.
Yes,
Should
that's right.
that have been allowed to happen?
I'm not going to really comment on past government policy, or what I'm assuring you and all of your listeners is that will not happen while I'm interim chair. But I believe that the government has made it quite clear that they don't think it should now happen as well.
I mean, just should ground rents return to the sort of peppercorn rent they traditionally were? Isn't that what we need to aim for?
I think what we need to aim for is contracts that are fair. We need to aim for things where people aren't making commercial advantage out of ignorance. There are two areas that I am really concerned about. I'm really concerned about retirement homes, and I'm really concerned about people getting their first house. Neither of those groups of people are going to read a lease in absolute detail, particularly as leases are very often extremely complex. So I hope that these sort of programmes that you've very kindly invited me to will remind people, particularly lawyers, that they have an absolute duty to explain complex clauses to people. You can't expect someone who has saved 4, 5, 6, 7 years to get their first home, who is absolutely thrilled they've finally got themselves on the property ladder, to read some very complex legal document and understand what it means. That's what the lawyers should be doing for them.
Wanda Goldwag, thank you very much for joining us on the programme.